This is the Queensland Criminal Code Act 1899. It can be found online via Queensland Legislation. I was just looking through this the other day. It's a bit of an interest of mine. Specifically, Section 313, Killing Unborn Child. I know it's a bit of a grim topic, but as with all criminal law, these rules are important to maintain social order and cohesion. Without laws, who knows what might happen? Anyway, any person who, when another person is about to be delivered of a child, prevents the child from being born alive by any act or omission of such a nature that if the child had been born alive and had then died, the person would be deemed to have unlawfully killed the child, is guilty of a crime, and is liable to imprisonment for life. The second part, any person who unlawfully assaults another person who is pregnant with a child and destroys the life of, or does grievous bodily harm to, or transmits a serious disease to, the child before its birth commits a crime. Maximum penalty, imprisonment for life. Essentially, Queensland society has decided that attacking a pregnant lady and causing the death of her child is equivalent to murder. And I think most of us would agree. What a horrible thing to do, depriving not only a mother of her child, but also depriving the child of life. Of course, there is one major exception to this rule, the one that I've had greyed out this entire time, and I think you can probably guess what it is. A person does not commit an offence against subsection 1 by performing a termination or assisting in the performance of a termination. So again, Queensland society has decided that on the one hand, it's completely wrong to kill an unborn child, so much so that you could be sent to prison for life, but on the other hand, it's fine. From a moral perspective, it seems to not follow. Look, I'm not here to debate this particular point, but I'd just like to say that we could all agree that almost every person on this planet would agree that stealing someone's property is wrong. But we could also agree that a much larger proportion of the world's population would disagree with at least some elements of this practice. Interestingly, in the Termination Act, Part 3, Section 10, it states, despite any other act, a person who consents to, assists in, or performs a termination on themselves does not commit an offence. Why is that in there? In what situation is that warranted? Perhaps it's referring to the administering of a termination drug, but it doesn't state that. But back in the Criminal Code, Section 294, it states, when a child dies in consequence of an act done or omitted to be done by any person before or during its birth, the person who did or omitted to do such act is deemed to have killed the child. So obviously there's lots of conflicting laws surrounding this. Historically, as well as presently, not everyone agrees with all of this. I found it interesting, though, that not all states of Australia agree with Queensland law about the seriousness of killing an unborn child. For example, this is the Victorian Crimes Act, 1958, in which the only mention of a pregnant woman comes under the heading of serious injury. Serious injury means the destruction of the fetus of a pregnant woman, whether or not the woman suffers any other harm. Of course, they include an exception, other than in the course of a medical procedure. Just accidentally, I've stumbled upon the Victorian definition of woman. Woman means a female person of any age. See, that wasn't so hard. I'm not sure why politicians have been struggling so hard to define it. Admittedly, this definition was written back in 2008, so it seems like modern society has become stupider over the years. So killing a fetus in Victoria is considered serious injury, outside of medical procedures, of course. Where causing serious injury intentionally in circumstances of gross violence has a maximum penalty of 20 years imprisonment. So even within Australia, we seem to treat life of unborn children differently. There is clearly no universal agreement on this. While doing research, I found this article from The Conversation from a couple of months ago. In parts of Australia, unborn babies aren't legally seen as people. Here's why that needs to change. Basically, the article states that Victoria, the ACT, the Northern Territory, South Australia, Tasmania and Western Australia do not recognise the life of an unborn child as being separate from that of its pregnant mother. As a result, any harm done to an unborn child in any of the above jurisdictions could only result in the charge of causing serious harm to the mother, as we saw in the Victorian Crimes Act before. But it's a different situation under administrative law. The parents can legally be granted a birth and death certificate for the child. But why? Why are these jurisdictions so opposed to recognising the life of unborn children? They continue. Legislators and legal scholars in these jurisdictions appear reluctant to recognise the life of the unborn child. There are fears that doing so will negatively impact reproductive rights or could result in liability for a pregnant mother. And there it is. They want to have their cake and eat it too. On the one hand, they want to claim they are moral and virtuous, but on the other hand, they don't want to make anybody feel bad about so-called reproductive rights. They finish by saying, if there can be recognition of legal personhood under administrative law, but not under the criminal law, then the legal balance is off and requires readjusting. Legal personhood in Australia should not be determined by postcode. Although Australian society claims to be virtuous, if different states can't even agree on what is a person, then we're a long way off from building a unified society that genuinely embodies its values.